I feel like sometimes my position in the keto space is stop doing keto. I own that, like you don't need to do it forever. And that's what the book is going into. Here's all the reasons from neurotransmitters to gut health to athletic performance to a million different reasons why I think it's healthy to restore carbohydrates in your diet after a phase of keto. But I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I still want to highlight the amazing benefits of the ketogenic diet.
Hello, welcome. I'm Jason Prahl with the Human Longevity Project. And with me today, I have my guest, Tara Garrison. She is a health and wellness coach that I met a few years ago at a retreat center. And we got to talking and just hit it off when it comes to her main topic that she coaches and teaches, which is the ketogenic diet. And the reason that we connected so well is because we both share a view that is a little bit outside the mainstream when it comes to the ketogenic diet. So Tara, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
One of the things that we immediately started talking about when it comes to the ketogenic diet was that it seems very restrictive, and this idea of staying on it for a long period of time may not be the best idea. So that's really what I'd love to chat with you about today. And it's really the topic of your book. And that's really what I want to tell people about is short-term keto. And so we'll get into that. But tell me first, for those who aren't familiar with the ketogenic diet, really, what is it? What are we talking about?
Yeah, keto definitely deserves a seat at the nutritional table. It's been a life-changing intervention for a lot of people. And in a nutshell, what it is when you severely restrict or completely eliminate carbohydrates from the diet, and that can come from just purely fasting, not eating, or just not eating carbohydrates, your body is forced to find an energy source. And so what it does is if you're not eating anything, it will take your fat cells, break them up, send them through your liver, and turn them into these things called ketone bodies. And those ketone bodies fuel your entire body. And they have some cool benefits. They're anti-inflammatory. A lot of people refer to them as antioxidants. So that's why, if you have somebody, a lot of people know keto as something for epilepsy, right? That's really where it got started. And now we're finding many other neurological disorders. And that's because ketone bodies help reduce inflammation of the nervous system. So I became interested in it for the brain boosting, that kind of biohacky side of it. I was like, this is kind of cool. We're finding you're making more mitochondria, you're increasing BDNF, something in your brain that helps you be more on point and all of these things. So the basic gist of it is like the people who might be interested in the most, one are people who have high blood sugar, right? So all of a sudden you stop getting these spikes and drops. You just have stable blood sugar. Your body gets trained how to go into your own fat stores and use those for energy more easily, right? Because what happens normally, we get a little bit hungry and we have a granola bar or M&Ms or Swedish fish at work or something like that, even if you're not eating that kind of food. And, you reach for carbohydrates to replenish that energy. And we do that over time, over many, 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 many years. And our body just forgets that it can just easily tap into our fat stores and use those for energy. And you can also obviously eat fat, and that can also be turned into those ketone bodies. So you're switching your metabolic state where you're favoring fat as your primary energy source instead of glucose and carbohydrates as your primary energy source. And you get a lot of benefits in your metabolism when you do that.
Yeah. This is one of the things I love about human beings is that we are so adaptable, right? Like we can go and eat tons of plants. We can go and eat tons of meat if that's your thing. We can eat various fat sources from plants or animals, and we can modulate our metabolism between the two, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, what I think we see in the West is that so many of us have become so reliant on glucose, on sugar, on carbohydrates as a source that the mechanisms through which we tap into the fat aren't really the pathways aren't worked very well. They're not they're not turned on. And so in order to turn those on, our body needs to be given the right conditions, right? And to some degree, this is why this restriction of carbohydrates has come into play, is to sort of tap back into that mechanism that's built in there. And this is what I've seen, right? I mean, I've played with a ketogenic diet a lot in my life. It's not something that I do regularly, but it's just something that I tried with a lot of fat as my fuel. So I was eating a lot of various fats. I did a little bit of fat. Right. So I played with like the ratios of carbs, fats, and proteins. Yeah. And what I noticed with those approaches is that there was a sweet spot for me. There wasn't this like one size fits all approach, which is what I see in a lot of the nutrition world is that from my perspective, there's a ton of truths, right?
Yeah.
And yet they're truths for certain people in certain contexts, right? And
Right.
so the danger I see in the nutrition advice that's out there for most of the people that I watch or listen to or come across is that they're preaching or teaching one approach as if that's going to work for everybody, and
Amen.
that's just not the way it is, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I really struggle with dogma in the nutrition field, telling somebody that we have messages from meat's going to kill you to plants are going to kill you,
Right.
and it's like it's causing this almost hysteria, I feel like, in people. And so I don't like the guru approach. I don't like that I have all the information and here, learn from me, and this is how you do it, and just do what I say. I really, really despise, honestly, that kind of mentality. We're here to serve and give options and give information that is food for thought for people to be able to find their own way. And so that's a lot of like what the gist of this book is. And I love that you said, like keto is enhancing our ability to tap into certain systems in our body. And that's how I look at it. Like, I don't want anybody going their whole life feeling like they can't eat a carbohydrate ever again. Oh my gosh, and there's a line in the book that I share, and it's keto is the tool, not the destination.
Mm.
Now, for very, very, very tiny, minute percent of the population that have therapeutic reasons they're doing keto, like keto might be a forever thing for them and they feel better, and that's great. But for most of the population, really all I'm trying to do is mimic nature. So anything that I do in health, I tell people this all the time. I'm like, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but we don't know how the body works. Like, we're not even close to understanding how the body, we're like prehistoric ages of understanding truly how the body works. And the example I give is, oh, how the body works completely. Okay, make one. Oh,
Right.
you can't? Okay. You don't really know how it works then, do
Right.
you?
Right.
And it's true. There's so much that we don't know. And so I look to nature as my guide. Nature is giving us clues all the time. And so even with like, I love biohacking and all these things, they're really fun. My question is always, does that mimic nature? Cold therapy. Absolutely. I would definitely be exposed to more temperature extremes. Sunlight therapy, sunlight. Yeah, I'm not getting as much as I would in nature, So keto, doing a phase of keto to me is training my body to do what it would be doing naturally in the wild. If we were living outside, we would be one, forced to move more. Like if we just lived primitively, like what our genome was built upon, we would have to walk more, move more, hunt food, grow food, and now we really barely have to move in our society now if we don't want to. You can just have your groceries delivered to you. You don't have to go to the store. And if you do, you can just sit in literally in your house. When you get in your garage, you're still in your house and you sit and you ride to the store. I mean, we're very sedentary. So there's that. And then on top of it, we have any food that we want available to us all the time. So like, why would you go through hungry spurts if you don't have to, and you have food right in front of you all the time? And so keto, what it's doing is mimicking that. It's what we would do is we would, get hungry. We're out of food. We got to go find more, and tough luck, tough cookies. There's none right now. And so we would start to go into this ketogenic state. Now, and that's cool. It's really good for our bodies. So many things get upregulated. But if we found food, or we had a summer and we had more fruit or potatoes or whatever growing and available to us, we would definitely eat that, and our bodies would thrive on those carbohydrates. And then we might run out, we might not have as much food available to us, and we would easily transition into ketosis. And so that's really what I'm trying to share here, is that we're at a point in human history where we now have to choose to mimic nature because we've disconnected from it so much. And so doing a phase of keto, which is a different amount of time for everybody. If you're very insulin resistant and have high blood sugar and a ton of inflammation, I would recommend doing keto for much longer than like maybe Jason. You might 4 weeks probably get you quite the metabolic benefit because you're already metabolically healthy. The whole transition will probably be easier for you, and so on. So, but I do think most of us have lost this ability to easily transition into ketosis. And so training your body how to do that. I mean, for me, it's almost noon right now at the time of recording this, and I trained really hard. I still haven't eaten anything. I don't even feel hungry, and I can train like beast mode without food because I've trained my body how to perform optimally without being so dependent, as you mentioned, on incoming carbohydrates all the time.
Right. Yeah. And we're talking with Tara Garrison, author of Short Term Keto, a 4-week plan to find your unique carb threshold. And this comes out December 21st today. So this makes a great gift. Honestly, as we get into the new year, employing something like this is a fantastic way to start off your new year, to reset your metabolism, to get on a new track. And this is what I find too with the ketogenic diet is, sometimes it can be challenging to do something like a ketogenic diet if you're not used to it. And just like anything else, there's always a little bit of challenge in changing the habits, and the shift in the metabolic pathways can be a little bit disruptive, right? And so what I find though is that as we push through that little hump at the beginning, then things start getting really easy, right? And I look at you and you're extremely fit, right? This is another benefit, right? So we have, of course, the insulin and the blood sugar benefits that come from a ketogenic diet. So if you have metabolic issues, this is fantastic. Any of the cognitive or brain impairment, anything related to the brain, ketogenic diet is fantastic. Metabolic flexibility, weight loss, fat loss, it's also extremely, extremely effective, right? Because we're getting into that sort of fat metabolism. We're training the body to really rely on that. And what I find is that as the body gets comfortable sort of burning fat for fuel, like you said, the hunger pangs, the desire for the carbohydrates start to diminish, and your habits start to change. And so this is what I love about this approach. And so maybe tell me about that, the transition period. What's your experience? I know you coach a lot of people on this. I've experienced this myself, but I know people have really, really struggled, especially if they have blood sugar issues. Those first few days, the headaches, the disruptive sleep, there can be some changes. So maybe talk to me about those.
Yeah, I'd say for most people, the harder that transition is for you, the more you need to do it.
Right.
I've actually, I'm not saying keto is a cure for hypoglycemia. And I definitely say this with like a big, like, check with your doctor, but I have had several people who had hypoglycemia that it was very hard for them to get into ketosis. And I didn't know they were doing it. They've used one of my programs and they've emailed me like, my hypoglycemia is cured. Like this, like changed my life, but it was really hard for me to get in. And I look at that and I'm fascinated by that. Because I think at some degree, the harder it is for you to transition into ketosis, I'm looking at it from a logical level of like, it seems to me that your body just has a hard time making that transition. And man, if you're having a hard time losing weight or keeping your energy levels up throughout the day, that I would assume is a huge contributor to that. So, for me, transitioning into ketosis is pretty easy because I'm very metabolically flexible. Now, if you have a really hard time, there's a few things you can do to offset that. One, make sure you're getting adequate salt and water. Hopefully I feel like the keto community has done a good job pushing this message out, but your kidneys do start to excrete sodium at a much faster rate when you go into that ketogenic state. So a lot of what people deem as keto flu, a lot of that, sure, some of it is that your body is trying to learn how to run off of a new entirely different energy system, and that's taxing on the body. Like think of like running 3 miles, it's
Well,
like
it can
hard.
literally be tiring, right? Like
Yeah.
I've seen people go through
Yeah.
this and they don't get any of the flu-like symptoms, but they just get drained. In
Drained.
other words, it's tough for them to sort of
Yeah.
utilize the energy at first.
Yeah, exactly. Your body's going through a tough transition. It's not used
Right.
to it, but water and salt to make sure that you're getting, I like to say somewhere around up to a gallon of water with 2 teaspoons of salt in it. That would be a great thing to do during that time period. And also sometimes using ketones, like exogenous ketones, ketone esters or ketone salts, like can kind of get you over that edge. I like
It
ketone
helps in that
salts.
transition.
Yeah, just so
Yeah.
you're like, you can do okay at work and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, if you get past that hump, which is usually anywhere from like 2 to maybe 4, maybe max 5 days for people, you get past that. I love seeing that point for people because
It's
they're
like a
like,
magic switch
oh,
has been flipped. Yeah.
yeah, they're like, I
Totally.
feel so good and I'm not having energy lulls in the middle of the day. And oh my gosh, and
Yep.
so salt, water, sleep, understanding that your body's going through something hard and don't freak out about that. Do not expect to have the same level of athletic performance in the gym. I would honestly recommend just walking a lot that first week, which helps your body runs off fat oxidation for walking. So it's like body's getting the memo. This is what we're doing right now, so those are just some really basic tips on getting through that transition. And then just a push to like, if it's hard for you, like, learn how to optimize it, get a coach if you want or whatever. But like, that's generally a signal that you really need to train your body how to do this.
I love that. Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that it's not hard for some people. For some
Right.
people, this transition is actually relatively smooth and easy. So I don't want to
Right.
paint the picture that it's hard for everybody, but it can be for certain
Yeah.
individuals. And I think part of that too is not only the condition or the state that somebody might be in terms of their metabolic health, but also their constitution. Right? We all have a different constitution, and we're all different. Right? So
Yep.
yes, we can all tap into our sort of fat metabolic pathways. Some may be more inclined, metabolically speaking, to be in
100%.
that state, right? So we're all a little different, and that's
Yep.
really why I love your book, is because you talk about this this carb threshold that is different for everybody, and how to find that. So maybe talk to me about that, because the standard ketogenic approach is, less than 20 grams of carbs per day or something like that, right? There's that varies, right? But it's so low carbs. It's like almost no carbohydrates,
Right.
and fat and protein is okay, but that's really restrictive, especially if you're going to do it forever, right? So talk to me about maybe your journey with that, how you discovered this idea that maybe there's another way to do this.
Well, honestly, I mean, it started with my own experience, and that was discovering that after, when I first went keto, I experienced a lot of brain benefits. I really appreciated that. I felt almost emotional healing because I had been very low fat before that. So it was like, oh, wow, I think I just got a hormone shift that my body's really liking. After time, though, that went away. Like I just was not thriving. I was full keto for a year, and I did a lot of experimentation. I ran the Boston Marathon in ketosis, training, all sorts of different
And by the way,
variables.
there's pictures in here in the book, and you're really, really fit now. You don't look nearly as fit in some of these photos.
Yeah, and I share that in the introduction to the book. I actually lost muscle and gained body fat on keto. And just speaking of the bio individuality, like the entire time, and this was like, I mean, at the time I was dating one of the leaders of the keto world. I mean, we knew how to optimize it. I was eating
Yeah,
protein.
you
I
were
was
in it.
training. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel like, and I was doing these things with clients and they're getting success. I don't feel like I was just like not doing keto correctly or anything like that. I just think that my body, and I have done some genetic testing and I have really good blood sugar management. I train with a lot of intensity. Like I feel like my body just does a lot better with some carbs. So I learned that through my own experience because I gained, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 8 pounds of body fat and lost like 7 pounds of muscle or something
Wow.
like that during my keto year. And then once I brought carbs back in, I dropped back down to what I had done before and then gained even more muscle, and I will say, I do feel like my body requires fewer carbohydrates now it's more responsive to those carbohydrates from doing keto. So I'm grateful for that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's really interesting what you just said there,
mhm.
because I think this is the crux to, I think, perhaps one of the biggest advantages of a ketogenic diet is that it actually makes you a little bit more sensitive to carbs, so that you actually don't need as many. You don't need as much to fuel you, right? So you get a little bit, and boom, you have a ton of energy.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Jeff Volek and Dr. Stephen Finney, they're researchers on the ketogenic diet, and particularly with athletic performance, have a really interesting study on ultra marathon runners. And they had a ketogenic group that had been adapted for a very long time to keto, and then just a regular standard, carbohydrate diet. And they showed that they were replenishing glycogen from running I think they actually put them on bikes for this study, but they were replenishing glycogen at the same rate as the carbohydrate based athletes, which is fascinating. So the conclusion from that is that possibly keto has a glycogen sparing effect the longer you are in ketosis, and so I feel that, I'd say I'm generally most days still pretty low carb compared to maybe traditional standard American diet. But man, like I feel like I need very little and my body still just goes boom, so grateful for that.
Yeah, I just want to hit on that, because glycogen is essentially the glucose or the carbs that's stored in the liver and in the muscle, right? So we do need that, right? So this is the thing. I think you and I have talked about this a lot, and I think anybody that's really familiar with the metabolism and the body and ketogenic diet will recognize that the body needs sugar, it needs glucose, it needs glycogen.
Always,
It's
even
just a matter
in ketosis, you're going to have blood sugar.
It's just a matter of, do we need to consume it in the form of rice and these other starchy carbs and sugars, right? That's the question, and that's what you're talking about. Right.
Right. Or so
Exactly.
much of it, and I'm definitely, I feel sometimes I'm like the carb champion of the keto community,
Right.
I'm like carbs, 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 I'm a little bit of an outlier, but like carbohydrates themselves are, in my opinion, definitely not the problem with human metabolism. We look at Japan, Okinawa, one of the blue zones, which you've so beautifully illustrated. By the way, I just have to say, in your human longevity project, I love that you broke into bread and carbs and all of these things in these area blue zones where people are living to 100 and older. And I shared similar message in the book about, Okinawa. We're sitting here saying carbs are making people fat, carbs are ruining people's metabolism. The traditional Okinawan diet, where we have the highest population of centenarians, people who have lived to 100 or older in recorded human history, the traditional Okinawan diet is 85% carbohydrates.
Right. Sweet
They're now
potatoes, rice, right?
and they're
Lots of
now down to
vegetables,
like
lots of
maybe
fruit.
60. Yeah, they eat more protein now, and like, but still, like from that centenarian data point that we have, it's 85% carbohydrates. We have China, who is their obesity rate is 5 to 6%, and it's only that high because in the cities where there's American fast food, it's 20 to 30%. So they would be under 5%. They eat more rice than any country in the world. So we can't isolate the macronutrient carbohydrates as the problem in human metabolism. Obviously, it's not. It's a
Yep.
multifactorial thing. And, I think a lot of the issues here in the US, I mean, there's so many. We would have to record a 20-hour podcast to list all the things that contribute to obesity and metabolic, poor metabolic states. But I would say, it's overeating and not moving enough. That those things contribute to this state where we're just overloading our body with energy for so long. So,
Totally.
carbohydrates in and of themselves, wonderful. I love them, and so it's cool to do something like keto, a phase of keto, because you really tap into how those carbohydrates make you feel. Like you can tell when you've overdone it. You're like, that I did not need that much, and so you start to get. It's a little bit easier to intuitively eat, I'd say, after doing a phase of keto, because you just become so aware of how your body is feeling in accordance to like the macronutrients that you're eating.
Beautiful. Yeah. And again, we're talking with Tara Garrison, the author of Short Term Keto, a 4-week plan to find your unique carb threshold. So we've been dancing around the title, I think, with our
Yeah.
discussion. Why did you call it Short Term Keto? What's the essence of what you're really trying to convey in that message?
Well, one of my, like, I guess you'd call it my tagline that I developed was do keto, not forever. And truly, like, this is my short-term keto is my best way of communicating that I am an advocate of a ketogenic diet. I am not an advocate for a ketogenic diet forever for all humans, very, very tiny percent of the population. But I didn't want to I feel like sometimes my position in the keto space is stop doing keto.
Right.
I own
Right.
that, like you don't need to do it forever. And that's what the book is going into. Here's all the reasons from neurotransmitters to gut health to athletic performance to a million different reasons why I think it's healthy to restore carbohydrates in your diet after a phase of keto. But I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I still want to highlight the amazing benefits of the ketogenic diet. And so short-term keto is my best way of expressing like, I am an advocate of a ketogenic diet for a lot of the population, especially if you live in the United States or Australia or the UK where obesity is high. But I don't think that it needs to be this now you can never eat carbohydrates again for the rest of your life. And so,
Yeah, I love that. And as soon as I started thumbing through it and reading some of the intro and the first parts, I'm like, this is like the anti-keto book. And I
yeah,
kind of loved it in that way because you're pointing out all the flaws in the thinking when we could become too laser focused on something. And again, to your point, there are people who really can benefit from a long-term ketogenic
yes,
approach and being very strict. But for the overwhelming majority, especially those that are using it for, better blood sugar regulation, a little bit of weight loss or fat loss,
yeah,
it really is something that can be done on a cyclical basis. That's how I was using it as I got familiar with the ketogenic diet a number of years ago. First of all, I love carbohydrates, right? So like
right,
for me, restricting carbohydrates I felt very restrictive in my life. It
right,
felt like another thing that I had to put off limits, another thing that I wasn't able to enjoy, right? And not only in terms of like birthday cakes and a
hmm
piece of pie or some of this sort of luxury stuff, but even in terms of really good whole
Right.
wholesome foods that I was
Right.
having to restrict. Like, I can't eat too many apples. I gotta count the number of apples that I gotta,
No
eat.
quinoa bowl for you.
Yeah, like
Right.
and I think you and I, that this is one of our original discussions, is that it just seems like just logically, forgetting all the data, forgetting everything else, it's like that just doesn't seem to make sense to be able to truly restrict all these amazingly healthy foods. The
Right.
vegetables like carrots
Forever.
that might have a number of more sugar than others, right? Like this is crazy, right?
I
And
like to tell
so,
my clients, congratulations, you can eat carrots again.
right, exactly, right.
Wow.
Well, and this is one of the things that we talk about a lot in the Human Longevity Project and the work that I do is gut health, right? And
Yeah.
there are a number of research studies that have shown that a diet that is strictly meat and fat based starts to increase and create a little dysbiosis in the
Yeah.
gut, because you're literally feeding those bacteria certain elements, right? And you're restricting these amazing polyphenols from plants and some of these other things. Now, again, you can eat plants, right? I want to make that clear. Things like
Yeah.
salads and other things.
Traditional keto. Yeah.
Yeah, that don't contain a lot of carbohydrates and starches in that way. But there's a real disservice, I think, for some people in particular, that if you go hardcore in one direction, you're missing out on a lot of benefits of the diversity of the gut. So talk to me about that. You mentioned
Yeah.
neurotransmitters. So what are we
Yeah.
talking about there?
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, right? Because some people experience a tremendous healing if they already have dysbiosis of the gut and they go the carnivore community is
Right.
very popular for this. It heals a lot of that for them. They're like,
Right.
I'm happy again. I was depressed and anxious and a mess and like I'm happy again. Like, and I love that you brought this up because I'm like, yeah, but once you are healed, do you need to stay in heal mode forever? The analogy I give it with gut health a lot is if I was on a motorcycle and I fell and got some road rash on my arm and I poured apple cider vinegar on that open flesh wound, it's going to one, really hurt, and it's two, going to prevent healing. But what happens when I heal it? It's all healed. I can pour apple cider vinegar on my arm all day long and it's not going to bother me. And so I like to push that message a little bit to people who have gone through a healing, because it can be scary. It's like, no, but when I used to eat carbs, I had candida and all these horrible, gut issues. So like I'm going to go back to that place. And so tiptoe, because yes, you're absolutely right. I have seen many people experience dysbiosis of the gut by going into these extremes, right? And so I am a huge fan of feeding our gut bacteria foods from nature. Like I'm like, as many as you got nature, I want them in me, and it feeds short chain fatty acids and helps us make butyrate, which is good for our mental health when we eat fibers. I'm like a huge fiber fan.
Even yeah, like white rice, right? Like when we eat white rice, it actually, our gut bacteria start turning that into fatty acids in the form of butyrate, right?
Right.
And there's propionate and there's these other ones. And this is what people are taking, right? They're taking these short chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids as a supplement. And ironically, white rice a little can create that as well. So this is right. This is like the balance that we're talking about here, where we need to really understand nature a little bit and not go too far into the extreme, try to supplement with all these things. If we can do so in a way that's a little bit more harmonious with our biology.
Yeah. And asking yourself how you feel when you take certain approaches is like my favorite measuring stick for anything. You ate Greek yogurt and you felt horrible and like, okay, you ate Greek yogurt and you felt amazing after. Got it. Like biofeedback from our own bodies is so vitally important, and the last thing I just really want to highlight real quick, because I love to get this message out there on the neurotransmitter thing. I just want to make sure people understand that your nutrition impacts the actual neurochemicals that you make that dictate how you feel. Right. And so a few things to know about when you're going into a ketogenic state. So when you eat a diet that is primarily fat and protein, you're going to favor dopamine production. So tyrosine, the amino acid that, helps us build dopamine, it gets favored to go across the blood-brain barrier when we're eating mostly fats and proteins. So how does that feel for us? We feel more driven. We feel more happy, more lit up about life, more, have more drive, even a little more competitive, like that that's a dopamine nature. So if somebody had really low dopamine, especially like I'll highlight type 2 diabetics who do tend to have low dopamine. It's correlated. And they go into a ketogenic state. Not only are they regulating their blood sugar, and that's going to feel really good, but they're also going to build dopamine that they haven't been having for a while. And they're going to feel pretty awesome, you know? But if you take somebody who already had good dopamine levels, they're likely not going to notice much of a huge change from going keto. Now, when you eat a diet that is high in protein and carbs, you're going to favor serotonin production. Serotonin feels like just feeling okay and happy with your life, like a general sense of well-being. And if you go keto when you already had low serotonin, and now you're dropping it even further, and you go into this high dopamine, like drive, go get it, get after life. But you also drop your serotonin, you can start to feel very kind of like anxious and not okay. And this kind of like wired kind of feeling, you know? And so symptoms of low serotonin that I like to just share are like feeling just kind of sad, or even teary, or you're not sleeping very well, digestive issues, you know, so just something to be aware of. But if you naturally have good serotonin levels, you go keto, you may not notice any of this. But for the people who are predisposed to already have high or low of one of those, I like to just educate and share just as a piece of information to consider as you're going through these journeys. You know, so often I feel like people have this mentality of like, oh, there's nothing wrong with keto, there's something wrong with you. Like you just need to figure it out. And it's like, no, actually that person might have low serotonin, and this is like really not a good fit for them from a mental health perspective, you know? And so honor how you feel, optimize things the best you can. And then if you're not feeling, I've coached so many people on and off of keto now. It's like, it's very simple. If keto is a fit for you, you're going to freaking know it. It's not going to be, I'm wondering, you're going to know.
Once you get over that first hump.
After you get, I'm talking week two, baby, day 1, 2, and 3, nobody likes keto. Okay. So like, that's not a good testing ground, you know, starting in week 2 for most people. And then, you know, I say, try it for 4 weeks, right? That's what I always tell people, try, because by the end of 4 weeks, if you really nailed it, you're going to know how you're feeling. And then if you don't love it, start bringing carbs back in. And that's what the book is like slowly titrating carbohydrates back up. So you don't slam your gut with, you know, not having adequate amounts of amylase, the enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates, and being able to break down more fiber. You know, I like to slowly titrate it back up. So it's just your body gets a gentle nudge. And then match your training to that. So you're using those carbohydrates effectively. And it's, to me, very unlikely that any carbohydrates are going to go to fat storage when you have healthy blood sugar management and you're active and using them.
Yeah. So. No, I love that. And this is one of the fundamental aspects, right? Like we can get into keto without even changing what we're eating, right? Just by intermittent fasting or fasting, right? So, in fact, it's 11 a.m. I haven't had anything to eat today. I had a little bit of ghee in some water, which is an Ayurvedic thing. But other than that, I haven't had really any meals. So, this is an interesting thing, is that as we get metabolically flexible, then we can start doing this in an intermittent fasting. And the body's in a ketogenic state, right? I mean, that is the overnight fast. Hopefully we're using that glycogen and that sugar that's in our body overnight. And so as we get into the morning, we're literally in this fasted state. That's why I love morning walks, is because it's like it's the best fat burning tool that you can do, because you're already low in glycogen. And so now your body's going to switch over into this fat burning mode. Yep. And so, you know, when you combine something like a little bit of an intermittent fasting, it doesn't even have to be super, super intense, but with a ketogenic diet approach, I mean, it's powerful, right? And again, what I notice, unwanted body fat, right? Unnecessary or excess body fat can drop off, right? I mean, you're extremely lean, you're extremely cut, but you work out hard, you do your thing, right? Like I don't want to paint this picture of it's just going to get you so ripped necessarily, right? But it does, there's this natural, I think for me, what I notice is there's this natural equilibrium that starts to come into play. And we may not be shredded if we don't work out a ton and do these things, but we let go of the excess that's unnecessary or unneeded or unwanted. And so that's a beautiful thing that happens. Again, the mood changes, usually for the better. I've noticed sleep tends to improve. The brain switches on. You're a little bit more active in the mental, and you're a little bit more precise with things. You generally have more energy, right, throughout the day to carry you throughout the day. So there's a ton of benefits switching to a ketogenic diet, staying there for as long as it feels good. And again, the reason I love your book is because you actually give people a plan to come out of that ketogenic state when they're in a good place and find this threshold of carbs that they can stick to that isn't necessarily, so you're really floating in a middle ground, right? That nobody's talking about, which is that people are either anti-keto or they're keto. And it's like, well, you can kind of be in this flux, in this middle ground. And that's really honestly where I found myself, is spending some time in keto through my intermittent fasting and sometimes daily fast, every week, and eating a little bit more ketogenic. And then sometimes being out of ketosis. So my body's literally fluctuating in and out of ketosis every day, multiple times a week. And so I'm enjoying the benefits of sort of both worlds, where I can have my carbohydrates, I can eat my normal meals and not feel like I'm breaking the law, and yet I can dip into a more ketogenic approach. And to be honest, sometimes I actually feel like I can feel that my body's wanting a little bit more of a ketogenic approach for a little bit longer period of time. So I think once you dip into this keto world for a little while, you reset the metabolism, you get to this point of feeling good. Now you're in this point of choosing, how do I want to really take my diet going forward long-term, right? And it's a beautiful place to be. I love the message.
Yeah. And I that was so well put. And I love the word equilibrium, as somebody who struggled with weight my whole life, that's it, to feel, I'm telling you, like, it's, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, she can have that, but I can't, I'm telling you, like, I mean, I used to live off, great. I used to live off Pop-Tarts and Kraft macaroni and cheese and Taco Bell. Okay. Like, I'm telling you that you can come to this place that Jason's talking about. I firmly believe that anyone can, if they take a path that gets them there. And sometimes you need a pendulum swing. That's why I love your word equilibrium, because that's what I felt like. I was so metabolically inflexible from decades of standard American diet and activity. I pendulum swung so my metabolism could start operating correctly with exercise, with intermittent fasting, with keto. And now I'm truly in this place where I'm not, there's no effort. It's just truly listening to my body. I've learned the ropes, I've learned the kind of foods that make me feel amazing. I learned that if I have protein bars instead of an actual meal, I'm not going to feel as good, so it makes me want to have an actual meal, and I can still have a protein bar later if I want, but it's, you get more in tune with what your body needs, just like you said. And you can tell you're like, I need more carbs a day for sure. And other days you're like, definitely sweet potatoes just sound disgusting. I just want a steak, so it's right. Such a wonderful place to be. Well, it's freedom.
This is why I think your message is important, because when we buy into this, when we put keto and this ketogenic diet on a pedestal, on a platform, and we make it the king of all ideas, then we lose sight of some of these other things, right? Because as I notice when I go in the grocery store, there's all kinds of keto treats that are packaged: keto bar, keto this, keto fat bombs, keto. And some of these are good because they're simple and they're real. Some of these other things are a lot more processed. And so I could literally be following a ketogenic diet and eating nothing but processed food. And to me, that is not a great approach, no matter if you're on a ketogenic diet or not, right? So I love what you're talking about, because it's really about a whole food ketogenic diet with as many plants, right? I mean, I'm looking, the beautiful part about this book is that it's got tremendous recipes, photos. It literally walks you through what to do and how to do it. It's even got some exercise stuff in here too, which is fantastic. And there's even different approaches, right? There's targeted, there's a cyclical ketogenic diet. There's one meal a day. There's all kinds of different approaches that people can flip through and decide what's good for them. But it's food based, right? And when you get into this idea that carbs are not the enemy, then you can get out of this idea that the ketogenic diet is the thing to put on top, and all the other stuff falls underneath. No, we're talking about real food, finding the carbohydrate threshold that's good for you, following a ketogenic diet, in the context of real food. Super, super important.
Yeah. And thank you for highlighting that. Like the meal plan, like I do not want anyone to ever be on a meal plan. You don't need to be like, who has figured out by now it doesn't work to be on a meal plan the rest of your life? Like
Right.
I don't want that for anybody. But it's a training ground. And the biggest thing that I really want to push, if you do this plan and if you try it out, is please answer the biofeedback questions. How did you feel this week? What was your mood like? What was your sleep like? Were you craving food like crazy? Do you need more food than that? Like what was your life experience at that level? And because all I'm really trying to do with anything I'm doing in health is just turn people back inside of themselves to find that power from within and try different approaches. But that awareness of how you feel when you do those things is so vitally important, and I do feel like going through some processes like this where you are a little more rigid can really help you like have data points, right? It's like, okay, I did notice when I totally took carbs out of my life, like I felt like that. And when I started bringing them back in and I eat around, this kind of level of sweet potato at dinner and, some, a big veggie stir fry at lunch, I like how I feel when I do that lifestyle. Okay, got it. And then you can just flow. And yeah, whole foods. I mean, if we only ate real food from nature, like I wouldn't need a job. Like we would be good.
That's totally true. Well, and one of the things that came up as you were talking about that, I remember when I was trying to get really lean and cut, one of the things that I would do is follow a ketogenic diet most of the week. And then on the weekends, I would bring back, I would carb load. That was the old thing, right? Like this carb backloading.
A lot of people like that. Yeah.
Right?
Cyclical keto.
Yeah. And so what I noticed is that it was quenching my thirst for kind of a rich meal, right? And again, these were whole foods. I wasn't just binging on cookies and muffins, but I was bringing in some of these carbohydrates again. I was satiated, and I kind of got rid of the pang for those things, and that put me in this totally fed state to where I could exercise really well and get back into that ketogenic state. So it was a beautiful way to sort of play with that, right? And again, one of the reasons I love your book is because you actually walk through different approaches for people, and they can try out and play with these things. And again, as we approach the new year, for those looking to lose a little bit of weight, to get back on track, this is a fantastic book to do that, because it's not dogmatic in its approach. It's got a ton of different of methods and strategies that you can employ. It's got recipes, because again, if you're following a ketogenic diet, it can be a little challenging to come up with new and exciting meals, right? So there's a lot of great recipes in here. So
and just on that note, if you guys go to shorttermketobook.com, like you can get my top 100 keto recipes for free with your book purchase. So I really want to support, if you want to do keto after reading it, there's not keto recipes in the book. So I wanted to make sure everybody had those if they want to do that. So those are on my website, taragarrison.com or shorttermketobook.com. And you can get my top 100 keto recipes that I made all the time. So
beautiful. Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tara. Again, Short-Term Keto, a 4-week plan to find your unique carb threshold. It comes out December 21st today. So I encourage everybody to go get this. It's a fantastic book. It's beautiful. It's a nice big book with fantastic pictures. Tara, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you everyone who listened. And thank you, Jason, for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.